Hello, and welcome to the part one of our August event for Local Writers Read. I am Josh Gauthier, and I'm here with my co-organizer for the series, Claire Guyton. And we have the first two of our five readers for you tonight. Our theme this month is sticky situations. And those can range all the way from awkward conversations at work parties, to misadventures on a hike, to being chased by a dragon when your adventuring party wanders into the wrong cave. So we have a good spread of genres, of styles, of writers for you this weekend. And so our first two I will introduce. So Claire, in addition to being the co-founder and co-organizer of the series, has been a Maine Arts Commission Literary Fellow and a finalist for the Maine Literary Award. And her work has been selected for the Best Small Fictions Anthology and nominated for a Pushcart. Her short fiction appears in Crazy Horse, Mid-American Review, Vestal Review, River Styx, Sliver of Stone Magazine, and many other journals, as well as the Maine anthology Summer Stories. She's currently revising a linked story collection and researching a novel set in 1890s Maine. And our other guest tonight is Anthony D. Farr, who is a Maine transplant from Georgia, cubicle jockey by day, writer by night, and wannabe superhero. All good things. Anthony's short stories have been featured in 5 Wolfsinger publishing anthologies, and he is the author of the Eastern-inspired novel To Tread the Narrow Path, and the short story collection, The Albatross and Other Tales. Anthony is currently trying to find a publishing home for his second novel, The Lost Dreamer. And so without further ado, we will transition right into our readings. And as always, I will be watching the comments on Facebook, so feel free to chime in with comments and questions for our readers, because we'll have some time at the end for a bit of discussion. And so without further ado, Claire, please take it away.
Thank you, Josh. All right, this is a story I published at New World Writing in 2019. It's called SAT Question, The Moon. 4 co-workers, Jenny, Alyssa, Myra, and Fran, wish to attend an important conference. To save on gas money, they decide to carpool for the 3-hour drive. At the 2-hour mark, they approach a bridge in an old mustard-colored station wagon. Road signs warn of construction and altered driving patterns, and just ahead, a concrete barrier cuts off one of the 2 driving lanes. What happens next? Consider the following notes and choose the best answer below. Note 1. Jenny fears bridges and won't drive over them. She can be ferried while she sweats and stares and hums in a loud monotone, gripping her seat with both hands, but she will not drive. Note 2. Alyssa is willing to drive anywhere, anytime, but only if she's driving a compact car. A big car terrifies her. She considers the station wagon much too big. Note 3. Myra was a great driver of anything until she had a recurring dream last winter about driving over a man's legs. She's just tooling along and then bump, 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 bump. What's that? How could a man's legs ever be in the way of your tires? Her husband keeps asking, but she's convinced it was a warning and refuses to drive again, ever. Note 4. Fran, owner and driver of the station wagon, won't drive alongside concrete barriers. She's convinced if she does, she'll wind up scraping against the concrete and then swerve away to scrape against the other side and then back and forth until she's a gigantic mustard-colored pinball. The only way to avoid this is to come to a complete stop on the highway in one narrow lane with furious drivers piling up behind her. Again, your question, what happens next? Select the best answer below. A. Fran's fingers fuse to the wheel. She steers into the lane directed by orange cones. Concrete as far as the eye can see, concrete walls curving toward her. My God, they're so thick and no line. Fran sees no line marking the edge of the barrier, a line like the one she once saw marking a concrete barrier on another state's highway when she was a passenger. And she thought then, see, if they just mark the edge with a colored line on the highways at home, then maybe I could trust that this awful, pale, vacant concrete what's-it isn't too close to my car and I won't hit it. But they don't, because like always, there is no line. The car slows. Go, Fran, go, her friends chant. Go, Fran, go, Fran, go. She slows a bit more. Go, Fran, go, Fran, go. She stops. Shit, Fran, shit. B. Fran shoots across 2 lanes of traffic and onto the shoulder where she slams the brakes and comes to a squealing stop. Everyone sits in silence until Fran nominates Myra, whose fear is ridiculous. At least concrete barriers do exist and they make driving more dangerous. At least bridges do exist and could collapse any minute. At least Alyssa is correct when she says that a larger car is more difficult to maneuver than a compact one. But it's a big fat flippin' guarantee, says Fran, that there is no man lying on the bridge, his legs ready to spring out just as they get to him. If Myra will get past this concrete barrier on the bridge, Fran or Jenny can finish the drive. Well, says Jenny, I hate asking you to do something that pains you, Myra, but if you could just get past this awful, this terrifying, this life-destroying bridge, I'd be happy to drive. Okay, look, says Alyssa, get real, Myra. Get a working brain. Get a move on. Shake a leg. Come on, say all the women in their high, cracked voices, each and every one sounding just like Myra's mother and not entirely unlike Mrs. Colvin, her awful 8th grade gym teacher who made Myra run until she puked. Come on, Myra, just do it. Just do it. As though in a trance, Myra just does it. She gets out of the car and switches places with Fran. Just do it, Myra, just do it. Just shake a leg. She turns the ignition, guides the Volvo onto the bridge, slips quietly along the concrete barrier, the life-destroying bridge, disappearing under them, and all is well. They're almost bump, 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 bump. What's that? C. Fran shoots across 2 lanes of traffic and onto the shoulder where she slams the brakes and comes to a squealing stop. Everyone sits in silence for a moment. Then they all speak at once, but Myra, with her trained singer's voice, she once got as far as off Broadway, cuts right through the others. She explains that Alyssa's fear of driving any motor vehicle larger than a compact car is not object specific like Fran's fear, which depends on a concrete barrier like Myra's fear, which depends on a man's legs like Jenny's, which depends on a bridge. Alyssa's fear is size specific, explains Myra, so it's relative and therefore should adapt to circumstance, therefore must be impermanent, therefore must be conquerable. And anyway, if Alyssa's fear is size specific, says Myra, which it most definitely is, that's been stipulated, then if you think about it, her fear, in a way, depends on a kind of prejudice, really, because it's not okay to judge anyone or anything by size. Is it? No, it's not. So really, if you care about decency, says Myra, if you care about what's right, then there's just no avoiding it. Alyssa must drive. Alyssa says, absolutely not. But this solution suits Fran very well, so she agrees with Myra. Jenny's not so sure about object permanence and being size specific, and no one should ever have to do anything she really, really, really doesn't want to. But then again, says Jenny, if you can just get us past this awful, this hate-filled, this future annihilating bridge, then I'll take the wheel for the rest of the trip. So they badger Alyssa. All 3 of them, they badger and just keep on badgering her. Don't be so sizist, says Myra. Try to dig deep, says Jenny. Don't be conquered by prejudice, says Myra. Don't just sit there and gape, says Fran. You're wasting time, they all say. We have to go. Adapt to circumstance. Because Alyssa is the youngest of 5 children, she's used to capitulating to a slew of yammering voices. She's used to condescension. She's used to being told. So she gets out of the car and switches places with Fran. She starts the car And then she jams the gear shift into reverse and backs down the shoulder at surprising speed, the car rattling and shaking while her friends whimper or scream or hum in a loud monotone. They beg her to stop, but she goes faster and faster and now seems to have gone off-road and is heading toward a clump of trees, but she ignores the mottled green growing in her rearview mirror and says, "This is what you get when you go into my room. Read my diary, take my shit, won't let me play Monopoly, tell mom that I..." D. Fran shoots across 2 lanes of traffic and onto the shoulder, where she slams on the brakes and comes to a squealing stop. Everyone sits in silence for a moment. Then they all speak at once, except Jenny, who stares at her lap. Soon, her silence infects the others, and each of them mutters to a halt, then looks at Jenny, always the peacemaker, always coming up with a compromise. Plus, she was the one who took the department's concerns to management, winning them a once-a-month casual Friday. True to form, Jenny has a suggestion. "We should turn around and drive home," she says, "then spend the day getting blotto at a bar." And then just say they were at the conference. How would their boss know any different? "No, no, no," the others say. "This isn't the woman who got us casual Friday. No, we can't lie. We deserve to wear jeans once a month." "Look," Jenny explains, "we have no choice. I can't drive over a bridge. Fran can't drive alongside concrete barriers. Alyssa won't drive anything bigger than a Mini Cooper, and Myra can't drive at all." "What I notice," says Alyssa, "is that you say I won't drive, but everyone else can't." "The point is," says Jenny, "there is no logical way to proceed without forcing someone to do something that is so frightening as to be debilitating." "And what I notice," says Myra, "is that you say I can't when I certainly can, but I choose not to drive when it means I will pulverize another person's legs by doing so. I'm making the only ethical choice, but it is a choice, and I would like to be appreciated for that." Jenny says they will all appreciate each other so much more once they've got a few pitchers of beer in them. "Now I'm noticing something," says Fran. "I'm noticing that you, Jenny, couldn't care less about the fact that I don't like beer." "Look, Jenny," Alyssa says, "it's high time you put some muscle behind all that talk of compromise, all that 'I hate to make you uncomfortable' crap." "Yeah," says Fran, "how long does a person get free points because she talked the boss into Levi's once a month, when anyway, we ask for once a week?" "It seems pretty clear," Jenny says, "Myra, that you like to be the nice one, the reasonable one. But since when did you bring donuts to work?" "Since when," asks Alyssa, "did you think to invite me to your Zumba class?" "And when," Myra asks, "are you going to stop stinking up the lunchroom with those tuna sandwiches?" Jenny has frozen, her eyes wide. So the others lean in. "You need to stand up and tackle this foolish phobia of yours," hisses Fran. Myra pokes Jenny on the breastbone as she points out that there is no reason to fear bridges. They are colossal, indestructible, not fragile like a man's legs. And now Alyssa, just an inch from her face. "You need to get behind that wheel and drive over that bridge and stop all this crazy talk about beer and can't and won't and lying and cheating." Jenny gets out of the car and changes places with Fran. She adjusts the seat. She adjusts the rear view mirror and the side mirrors. She runs the window washer and then the wipers until the windshield is clean and buffed to a crystalline shine. She turns the ignition, takes the car out of park, and puts her foot on the brake while she says this: "What I notice is that you're all very happy to force me to do something that I find so frightening as to be debilitating. I further notice that no one appreciates all the hard work I did to get our monthly casual Friday. And I further notice that I am now in charge of this car." Jenny takes off, but instead of steering into the lane, she stays on the shoulder, headed for some construction barrels clustered up ahead. She thinks Levi's and hits 20 miles an hour. She thinks all the donuts I wouldn't let myself buy and hits 30, 40. She thinks about how she switched to the line-caught, environmentally sensible tuna, which is too damn dry, and she hits 50. She thinks... E. For Christ's sake, why make it all so complicated? They agree to pay a construction worker to drive them over the bridge. He thinks it's so funny he won't even take their money. It's going to make a great story, and they have a high time at the conference and do a sing-along all the way back to the bridge, where it's now very late, very dark, and totally free of construction workers. Jenny, Alyssa, Myra, and Fran huddle in the car, safely on the shoulder. Fortunately, it's summer, so they don't need to keep the motor running for heat. All they hear are night sounds through the cracked windows, and their own breath as each sits in a stupor, stunned that she didn't predict this very situation earlier when they were on the other side of this bridge, working through the problem of how to get across the first time. Okay, says Jenny. Okay, what about that exercise at the conference? The one about team playing, where we had to threaten to shoot rubber bands at each other's forehead. What about it? Snaps Fran. How does shooting a rubber band get us across that bridge? Asks Alyssa. That's a good question. Plus, says Myra, in the most dispirited off-Broadway voice any of them has ever heard, we don't have a rubber band. Well, that's it, isn't it? Says Jenny. Yes, that's it, says Fran. It's all a test. This whole goddamn thing is a test, says Alyssa. You got that right, says Myra. It's a test. And we failed. Did they? Did they fail? The construction workers will be here again, and sooner rather than later. Those guys start early. Taking Jenny's lead, the women will suggest they've just arrived at the bridge after a night of carousing, forcing perky good cheer out of themselves and smiling until their faces hurt. And again, just like yesterday, the tanned, brawny man with startling blue eyes and a kind smile will laugh, shake his head, and take the wheel. Fran will move to the passenger seat, while Myra, so petite, jams herself into the back with Jenny and Alyssa. Alyssa will rub Jenny's back in tight little circles, while Jenny leans forward, gripping the edges of her seat, humming with eyes closed as they cross the bridge. The man with the eyes and smile and hard hat will tell them he has 2 daughters, that his ex-wife hates him, but she's a good mother, so he tries not to complain, that Myra maybe should call him sometime. He will refer to them as ladies, and he will again refuse to take money for his trouble. They will be too exhausted to hit that bar Jenny likes, but next week, as they tell and retell this story among themselves, they will decide to meet there after work on Friday. Fran will be the designated driver because she hates beer. The others will pay for her chicken wings and Coke. Over subsequent Friday nights at the bar, the reasons for their various driving phobias will slowly unspool. For example, Myra's therapist unearths a childhood memory that explains her terror of driving over a man's legs. She tells Jenny, Alyssa, and Fran about this discovery before she tells her husband. She still refuses to drive, which they all support. But back to now, right now, on the shoulder, their car pointing toward the bridge they cannot cross. The seats are wide and soft. The air is cool. They no longer smell exhaust and gasoline and hot pavement. And there are peepers. As late night falls on the mustard-colored Volvo, the 4 co-workers hear peepers, which is a sign of the fleeting Maine summer that works its way into the despairing mindset in this car, that supplants their feeling of failure and delights them all. And the moon, it's amazing, a giant silver disc. For a long time as a kid, says Jenny, I thought only I could see the moon when it was full, because nobody else was so completely stopped by it. Nobody else stared and stared. The others nod, remembering that same belief that the moon was only for them, not remembering, happily, the day they realized it wasn't. As they listen to the peepers, settle into the strange comfort of this place, this car, letting their eyelids get heavy, letting all that bright yellow light of the moon seep into their bones, they all do very much agree. Right now, it's okay to be on this side of the bridge. Right now, it's okay to rest. Thanks for listening. Anthony, you are up.
All right, thank you, Claire, and thank you, Josh. All right, I'm going to be reading 1 Mile Home, and this is kind of based on a true story of where I did this exact same thing when I used to work at the distribution center over in Lewiston. So the warehouse rumbled against the nor'easter raging outside. The steel frame shuddered against the icy blast. David locked up his office and walked down the hallway, muttering a silent thanks to the inventor of the automatic start on his SUV. He placed his laptop case and lunchbox on the counter at the security office and turned to the in-out board for management. He flicked his tab, David Allen, security manager, from in to out, and turned back to the office where the security officer, Nancy, peeked into his bags. "Cold night out, David," she said as she glanced in his case and box. "You drive safe on your way home. It's going to be a rough one, I hear." She pushed his belongings toward his side of the counter and leaned out, glancing at the white fury blowing right outside the front doors. "I'll be fine. Don't you worry. I live just across the river. You all be safe tonight. Don't do your rounds until the wind dies down." David turned to the door, then paused. "No worries, boss. I'm not green. I know what I'm doing." "I know," David said. "Just be safe out there tonight. It's a bad one." "Get you out of here before it gets much worse," Nancy said. "Give that little girl of yours a hug for me, won't you?" "You bet. I'll see you tomorrow." David grabbed his case and lunchbox. He paused as he opened the door. "Call me if anything weird happens tonight, won't you?" "Of course, boss. Go home. Rest up." She leaned to look out at the storm again and continued. "You'll need it to dig out of this one. Weather says we already gotten 2.5 feet with more on the way. Oh, and next time we have a big storm, you might want to wear your snow pants." She pointed at his jeans and clucked her tongue. "Don't worry about me. You guys just stay warm and safe tonight. I'm just going to my car. I'll be fine." David smiled as he pulled his face mask over his head, zipped up his jacket, and pushed his way out of the entryway. The wind fought against the door as he slipped out into the frigid, blasting wind. He squinted his eyes as the icy wind stung them. He used his knees to break the snow as he trudged through the unplowed portion of the parking lot towards his SUV. At the far end of the lot, the yellow flashing lights from the Snow Plow are all he could see from the monstrous piece of equipment. David reached his vehicle, opened the back hatch. Setting his bag and lunchbox down, he picked up a brush and a small snow shovel. He worked with haste to clear the vehicle, brushing off the elbow-deep snow from the top of the car, before moving down to the windshield and hood. The wind roared by, stinging his eyes with blasts of snow and ice. By the time he finished, a half-inch had accumulated over his car. After tossing the brush into the back seat, David waded through the snow to the back of the SUV. He dug massive heaps of snow away from the back tires and used his body to knock down the plow line, walling his vehicle into the spot. He stopped after tossing the last shovel of snow away from his car and leaned on the shovel, huffing loudly. Large puffs of vapor escaped his mouth, only to be swept away by the howling wind. David opened the back hatch of his SUV again and tossed the shovel inside. It landed with a thud and knocked snow over the gray carpet of the interior. He paused before getting in the car as the plow roared up behind his and stopped. Peter, the driver, decked out head to toe in an orange snowsuit, hopped out and ran over to David. "Everything okay, Pete?" David shouted over the wind. "You sure you want to be heading out in this? I hear the roads are rough." Pete pulled down his face mask and continued. "It's bad out there." "I know," David chuckled. "I'll be damned if I'm sleeping in the warehouse tonight. Weather like this is what four-wheel drive is for." I hear you. Peter turned back to his plow and waved his hand. "If your mind's made up, then follow me out to the road. I can at least make sure you make it out of the parking lot." "Thanks, Pete. Much appreciated." David spun on his heel and walked to the driver's side door, already warm and ready to go. He took a moment to get comfortable, taking off his heavy coat, gloves, hat, and face mask. He set them in the seat and aimed the heater vent down toward his white gear. David buckled his seatbelt and backed out of the spot. After spinning the tires for a second, he finally managed to gain traction and pulled away. The heavy white flakes buffeted against the windshield as he pulled right onto the main road. His headlights illuminated only a few car lengths ahead of the bumper. David squinted as he followed the road, more by memory than being able to see the asphalt beneath the thick covering. Peering out of his passenger window, he saw the nor'easter swallow up the bright lights of the warehouse that usually illuminated the sky for miles around. He looked back at the road and leaned forward, his forehead close to the glass. Close enough, David felt the cold wicking the heat from his head. He continued through the town, past the abandoned mill buildings, relics of the past glory of Raven's Bend. The frames of the old buildings, outlines the deepening snow blending into the white of the storm as he drove past. A plow rumbled past and David felt the vibrations in his feet. He continued at a snail's pace, keeping his head forward, eyes focused. He slowed to a stop at the light before the green bridge that leads to the rural outskirts of the town and toward home. The blinker clicked in time with the wiper blades as he waited for the light to turn. The tires spun again as he pulled forward and left at the light. On the bridge, he felt the wind pushing the side of the vehicle, and he fought to keep it in a straight line. Once over the bridge, David turned left again, past the rollerdrome, lot empty, lights off. No loitering teens waiting for their parents to pick them up on a night like tonight. David knew the river ran just to the left of the road, but with the visibility, there was no indication of where the waters of the Androscoggin flowing beyond the white. He kept driving, and the faint lights of the town disappeared into the blizzard, replaced with the dim outlines of pines briefly showing through the whiteout, only to fade away as well. No other cars traveled the road along the river. David gripped the wheel as the vehicle pushed through the thick snow and feathered the gas pedal as he rolled into the rural section of town. After 15 minutes of driving at 10 miles per hour, David finally came to his road. He took care as he turned right to stay away from where he assumed the shoulder lay beneath the accumulated snow. He eased back into a straight line after his car slid coming out of the turn. David's knuckles whitened as he gripped the wheel. Coming down the hill, he picked up speed to help him on the next incline. His car slowed on the uphill, but managed to make it to the top. He swore as his headlights illuminated snow drifting into the road from the open field to his right. The drift made the lane undrivable. 4 feet of snow crept into the road and seeped across the middle. The wind tore through the farmland unburdened. The blinding snow flowed horizontally past the windshield. David slowed to a stop and pulled into the opposite lane. He eased forward as the wind whipped around his SUV. He turned the wheel slightly to the right as he felt the car pulling with the blast of wind, looked at the GPS on the dash. 1 mile home, not too much farther. He felt the plow vibrating his car before he saw the headlights. That brief advance notice allowed him to jerk the wheel to the right, plowing deep into the drift, burying the hood into the snow as the plow sped past him on the left. As the vehicle drove into the deep snow, the engine sputtered to a stop, shaking. He sat gulping down deep breaths of air and flexing his fingers. In the rearview mirror, the plow disappeared into the muted white of the storm. David turned the key in the ignition. The dash lights lit up, but the engine did not start. He tried 3 more times to no avail. David closed his eyes, took a few deep breaths, flexing his fingers as he breathed. "Please start," he said with his eyes still closed. He turned the key. Nothing. David swore as he slapped his hands down hard on the steering wheel. He leaned over the passenger seat and retrieved his coat and dug through his pockets to retrieve his phone. David pressed the long pressed the number 2, and the display read dialing home. After 6 rings, the answering machine came on. "Hi," his wife's voice said over the phone speaker. "You reached Abigail and David Allen. Please leave a message after the beep." David rubbed his forehead as the shrilling beep screamed at him from his phone. "Babe, I'm down the road from home, buried the car in a snowdrift. I'm about a mile from the house. I know I was supposed to be working until the morning, but I was able to leave early. Call me when you get this." He hung up the phone and placed it on the dash. He drummed lightly on the steering wheel, watching his phone. "Call me." He drummed a little faster. "Come on, honey, call me back." The phone remained silent as the only audible sound came from the howling wind and pattering of snow striking the windshield. David struck the steering wheel hard as he could. "Damn it, can't believe I did this." He shook his head and tried his house one more time on the phone. When the answer machine picked up, he immediately hung up and tossed his phone to the passenger seat. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel as the wind whipped around the vehicle, already drifting the snow over the hood and up onto the windshield. David checked his phone again, pulled his coat into his lap. He clenched it close to his body before inserting his arms into the sleeves. Zipping up the coat, he let loose another swear, then put on his knit cap over his head and exited the vehicle. The wind and snow whipped around his face, stinging his eyes. The wind pulled the door from his hand, slamming it shut. David looked up and down the road, squinting to see the plow, but the visibility remained low. He turned toward home and waded through the waist-high snow to where it only came up to his calf. "Only 1 mile to go," David whispered. He pulled his face mask over his mouth and tightened his hood around his head as he began the trek through the maelstrom. He trudged through the thick blanket of snow as the storm intensified. David searched with the tip of his boot until he found the edge of the road and tried to keep his feet along the crumbling asphalt buried beneath the snow. He meticulously placed one foot in front of the other as he pushed through the snow against the wind. 1, 2, 3. David counted his steps, trying to keep track of his progress. He looked back to see how far away from his SUV he had walked, only to see a white wall of snow blowing sideways. Looking back in the direction he needed to go, David continued his trek. The wind shifted, and he fought to stay upright, flailing his arms to maintain his balance. David's eyes stung from the assault of ice and snow pelting his face. He held one hand in front of his eyes as he walked. David lost all sense of time and distance as he stumbled in his count. He fumbled in his pocket and brought out his phone. It lit up, but before he could check the time, it slipped out of his gloved hand, falling deep into the snow. Shit! Dropping to his knees, he fumbled around the drift, searching for any sign of his cell. He took off his gloves and set them on the drift and then dove back into the snow. A low vibration, different from the wind, gave him pause. The vibration grew more intense. David felt it rattling in his feet and into his legs. Looking up, he saw the plow barreling down the road toward him, the driver oblivious to David's plight. David dove to the right, just as the plow roared past like an angry beast chewing through the snow. The cascade of snow thrown from the plow washed over David like an ocean wave, burying him beneath feet of heavy snow. David slowly crawled his way back onto the freshly plowed road, shouting in vain at the fading tail lights of the snowplow. He turned and looked at the path of the road, freshly plowed, and he breathed a sigh of relief. He stuck his bare hands deep into his pockets and walked toward home. David felt the cold leaching the heat from his body. Snow stuck to his eyebrows and lashes, his face mask frosted over from the vapor of his exhaled air. As he pushed onward, his limbs grew heavy and his footfalls plodded along the road. David noticed the snow thickening on the road as the wind drifted it down across the open fields. The recently cleared path of snow disappeared as the storm reclaimed the road. David shuffling forward, trying to find his foot on the pavement. His visible path forward vanished into the storm. His heart skipped and his stomach turned as he lost the sensation of walking on asphalt. No, 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 David screamed as he kicked his feet around in the snow. He searched in vain for the hard edge of the road, but only felt the crunch of snow and ice beneath his feet. He twirled around, looking into the gray white swirling around him. David fell to his knees and let the wind buffet him. Come on, it was only 1 mile, David shouted into the storm. He stood and squared himself off against the wind. Picking a direction, he set off into the snow, into the storm. The fuzzy static of the nor'easter swallowed him, and he disappeared. In the morning, the wind had finally died down, and the sun blasted bright upon the blanket of snow left from the storm the night before. A silence permeated the fields, only broken by whispers of snow falling from the boughs of the pines. 1 mile from David's home, his red SUV remained buried deep within the drifting snow, blinkers still ticking along in a slow rhythm. All traces of David's trek the night before had been blown away during the storm. No footprints, no swath cut through the snow, no sign of his passage told the tale. The only trace left of David's walk lay within sight of his house, an old white farmhouse, framed against the morning sky with smoke gently pouring from the chimney. At the edge of David's property, near the barbed wire fence of the neighboring cattle field, a piece of blue fabric, the sleeve of David's coat, flapped in the wind. The wind pulled back the sleeve to expose David's blue, icy hand as he lay entombed beneath the hard-packed snow. Thank you.
Thank you both for reading those. It's always a delight to listen to both of your work. And I think tonight, I was just thinking about how these stories actually fit so well together. Both driving cars and both what would seemingly be such a simple task turned much more complicated by circumstance. But I think two very good takes on it. And we've got some comments in the chat as well. People just enjoying certain lines that you put. Claire talking about the moon, and Anthony, some of your descriptions of just nature and the snow plows. Those were definitely well received. So yeah, and if anyone in the chat has any questions for our readers, we definitely have time for that as well. I know there's a little bit of a delay, so I'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, Claire, I know that you had a question or two.
I have a couple questions. But first I want to say, I feel like impatience killed that guy. And since impatience is one of my biggest flaws, it's like a really terrifying story for me. It's also, we were talking before we did the reading that you're from Georgia and I'm also from the South. And so I know before we moved here, like I had no sense of, you know, what Maine was like. All I could picture was lobster and extremely cold. And I was just terrified of how cold it was going to be. And I remember like doing research, and like there was like research about like, if you're driving out in the rural part of Maine in the winter, take a coat with you and make sure you have a charged phone and, you know, all these things, you know, in case you get broken down or whatever. So I remember being afraid of those things. I mean, that's going to happen to me. That's going to happen to me one day, but I am not going to leave the car. That's the difference. For once in my life, I'm going to be patient and I'm going to wait for someone to come get me. But go ahead and tell us. I think we all enjoy hearing what inspires these stories. And you said that something similar happened to you, which obviously you were either more patient or things just went a little bit better since you're here with us. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so pretty much that whole story, except for the guy dying, actually happened to me. It was, you know, I was working, like I said, I was working at the Walmart distribution center in Lewiston, and it was a snowy night, and I went home, and it was early, so no one was expecting me. And same thing, my vehicle died in a snowdrift, and I couldn't get it started, couldn't get it out, and did the dumbest thing possible. And I got lucky. And so I kind of wrote this story almost as a, you know, what could happen, please don't ever do what I did, you know?
Yeah.
Because it did get scary. Like, you know, when I was out walking, it's not one of those things where I'm like, you know, I walked home and made it home fine. And, you know, it wasn't a big deal. It did get scary. And probably about halfway through, you know, at the point of no return, I was like, this is a really bad idea. I shouldn't have done this.
How long had you been living here when you did that? Was part of it not sort of being not really genuinely understanding conditions, or was it just you were just impatient?
I know we had been here for a while, so we moved up in 2006. That was around 2010, 2011, I think.
Uh-huh.
And I think that was just me. I was tired and I had been working some long shifts, and I wanted to get home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's banal, right? Like it's a lot of tragedies turn on something banal like that. Like, yeah. And it's just haunting, which is the other question I wanted to ask about influences, because I mentioned to you that your protagonist is just, it's sort of a really quiet story, even though something awful is happening. So there's a stillness, you know, to the winter scene. And I just can't help but picture somebody like pushing against a wall, like just pushing against something that's immovable. Like it's not going to work, buddy. You know, don't leave your car, you know? And it just reminds me of some sort of classic writers like Ray Bradbury's stories when one of his characters is pushing up against something that's immovable, or like Jack London. So I just wondered if you were influenced by writers like that.
Well, it's funny you say London, because the story specifically by London, To Build a Fire, I don't know if you've ever read that.
Yeah.
So To Build a Fire is the inspiration for this story as a story.
Okay.
You know, same type of situation. The guy, everybody tells him, don't go out in the storm, you're never going to survive. And then he goes out, he tries to build a fire, he keeps failing, and eventually, you know, bad stuff happens.
Yeah. But I mean, I kind of think that's I don't know how to make the point interesting, but it does seem to me so often that the difference between life and death, between just getting on with your life and tragedy, is some dumb little banal mistake, like just wanting to get home so you get out of the car, you know, or just staying in the water a little bit too long, so then you're too tired and you're too far out, you know, things like that. And it's just so sad. It's just so awful to think I mean, that's how life works. Anyway, somebody say something more positive than that.
Yeah. Well, I know it's more positive, but I think you're just hitting on an interesting point that for all that like Hollywood movies and stuff turn on explosions and big dramatic moments, which are great because I mean, I write pop fic and there's dragons and stuff. But I mean, so much of the things like those life-defining moments are like a phone call, or like taking that left turn on the drive or whatever. Like it's those such simple things, and then the repercussions of that become so much more. And it's always interesting to me when fiction plays with those moments, because I think fiction can linger there in a way that we never do when like we're actually living things out.
Yeah. And the thought of that being somebody's sort of last sad, painful, lingering, obsessive thought, why did I leave the car? Why did I leave the car? You know, why did I drop the phone? Why did I pull my gloves off? It's just so sad. So yeah, it kind of holds you in the stillness and the sadness of that. I like that. It's like this dark moment, you know, that you have to sort of visit with. But at the same time, you don't tell us that much about the person. So it's not like you say, it's not like a movie situation where you've melded with the person, and, you know, it's like this big forces, and you know, you can't stand the thought of the person, you know, losing. This is more like a study. It's almost like it's a little study, you know, which I like. It's really interesting. Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you.
And Claire, I wanted to ask, because I'm at this point fairly familiar with some of your work, and I know how you like playing with form and kind of expectations. And for this piece in particular, dealing with like the multiple choice questions versus like the act of driving over a bridge, like you blend them together, but as you're approaching a new story and playing with form and like making a decision to write the story in that way, just kind of what does that process look like for you, either for this story specifically or just in general as you think about form and short fiction?
Well, I've written quite a few stories like that. I call them subverted forms. And I actually wrote my thesis on this when I got my MFA, because I discovered that I really liked experimental fiction, and trying on, you know, different voices and different forms. And I wanted to figure out, I had conceived of a story in the shape of a product label. And I wanted to figure out how to make the story work, because there are plenty of stories that have been published that are like that are in a different narrative form. And I don't think that they work when they read like the form. Like when I can't really tell that much difference between the actual product label and the story because it looks that much like a product label, then I don't think it's successful, because I think you have to have story in the story. You know, you have to have something that's interesting and different that takes you on a little adventure. And so I do have like very specific things that I developed that I feel like you have to check off to make a subverted form story work. And one of them is that you have to establish the form really well enough in the beginning so that you identify the form. It looks on the page like the form, and it's something that everybody can relate to. So everybody's going to have that form come to mind. And then you have to very quickly break a rule. You have to do something that form wouldn't do. But you break the rule only a little bit, and then you break it a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then you let that take on momentum and weave in the kind of story you would tell in a more traditional form if you weren't writing this way. And then the real trick to it, and this was really hard in this one, is you have to figure out a way to come to an ending, still sort of within that narrative shape, but something has to move, right? Something has to change in some way, or it has to be an interesting refusal to change. And that's what's really tough for me with subverted forms. And this particular story, I wrote it during my year when I wrote a story every day. This was one of them. And it took me, I came back to it several years later, a year after that year. And I finally got so frustrated with the fact that I couldn't figure out the ending, that I had it next to me as I went to bed. And I said, okay, I'm sick of this. You need to be able to send this out. It needs to work. You are going to sleep. And when you wake up, you will sit up and you will write the ending to the story. And believe it or not, that is exactly what I did. And I really loved the ending that I came up with that morning when I woke up and wrote it down. And I sent it off, and it got published in the first place I sent it to. So I'm really happy with it. But man, it was a struggle to get the ending right. That's a much longer answer than you probably wanted.
No, it's interesting though. And endings are always such a trick to bring something to a close. And I know I had heard that story before, but I forgot exactly how it ended. And so listening to it this time,
That's because you didn't hear the ending, Josh. I read it while I was still trying to figure out the ending. And then, so I got to the end, and then I said, guys, I can't figure out how to end this. What are your thoughts? So
okay.
You remember? Yeah, because I shared it with you and a couple of other people. And that was like 2 or 3 years before. And I kept coming back to it after that on my own. And I kept trying different things and not liking it until that night I was like, I've just got to figure it out. So
okay, yeah, that makes sense, because yeah, the ending is so, I think, resonant for that one, and how it brings it together. So
oh, thanks.
And just or kind of a real quick second part to that, do you tend to start with the form or the story, or does it vary?
I never start like I never look at a form and go, I want to write a story in the form of a product label or an SAT question. I never do that. What comes to me is a line or a situation or a character, something happening to that character. And then I've linked it heavily with something in life. So for the product label story, which I still haven't published actually, and I really like it, so I need to get it published. For that one, for example, I thought of a character who was obsessively buying face cream to try to fight aging. And so once I had her like sort of obsessing over buying this face cream, then I was like, oh, okay, this could be in the shape of a product label. That makes sense. Yep, the product is like mocking her. So I wrote that into it and it became the product label. So yeah, always, if I tried to, I personally believe that if I said, oh, I want to write something in the form of blank and then try to come up with story, I think it would be much harder to make it successful. I believe you always have to start with something that sort of comes naturally to you and then constrain it.
Yeah, and I'll kind of modify that for Anthony a little bit too, because I know like one of the questions that people love to ask and writers never know how to answer is like, where do your ideas come from? But I'm going to modify that a little bit, because I think, like we said, yours is such a great example of just like an everyday moment that in the form of a story becomes something more, right? It's like this examination of choices and this situation that this character finds himself in. So I think for you, like when you're setting about writing a new story and like picking those moments, like do you have a way that you consistently kind of find your way into the narrative of like deciding when it's going to take place or what that's going to look like?
So I'm very much a fly by the seat of my pants type of a writer. I think the way that I heard it described by a teacher once was an architect or a gardener. An architect designs before they start to build, whereas a gardener just kind of prunes and watches things grow and guides it. And a lot of times I think that applies to me as like I'm more of like a gardener. So yeah, my stories will start sometimes with just an idea or something that I hear, and it's like it plants a seed in my mind, and a lot of times it feels like the stories are telling themselves to me. Like for example, one of my stories that's in my short story collection is based on a bounty hunter that lives on a planet that orbits in a binary star system. And that came up because I was trying to figure out what kind of weather or what kind of real life star system would cause weather patterns like in Game of Thrones. And I researched it and found out that could happen from orbiting a binary star. So so I wrote a science fiction short story on a planet that has long summers and long winters because it's in a binary star system and it has a bounty hunter. And so that was that's stuff just come, I like I said, it's like an idea plants itself in my head and then it just kind of grows and I let it take me where it leads.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that. My process is very much more discovering than planning, which when it works pays off really well, and when it doesn't, I write myself into a corner and then yell at my laptop for a while. So
yeah, I can relate to that too. I mean, that's I think that's how all of my I don't think I've ever planned something and tried to. What will happen though sometimes is and I'm wondering if this has ever happened to y'all, I'll come up with an ending, like that natural thing that just dings me, that just plops itself into my head, is an ending. And then I have to write my way to that ending. So the process of discovery is figuring out what on earth could have happened to get you to that place. That has happened to me fairly often, and I like that. Does that ever happen to you guys?
Yeah, I know I've certainly had endings that I was writing to in the past. And sometimes my worst cases of getting stuck are when I don't know what I'm writing toward.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's just like a small fragment of the final scene, like knowing where people ending up or knowing where people end up can help kind of keep things going. Otherwise, I don't always know what that arc is, and it kind of sputters out. So it varies, but that's definitely been the case.
I know for me that's I do the sometimes I go with the ending and then write towards it. That actually happened just with the novel that I just finished that I'm editing right now. The Lost Dreamer. I wrote the ending to it quite some time ago, and so I've been steadily building closer and closer to the ending that I wrote for it.
That sounds so fun for a whole, because you know, I write short. I'm only just thinking about and researching and hoping that I can write something longer, a novel. Most, you know, I've always written short stories, and very often I write very short stories. So the thought of writing towards an ending of something that's 200 or 300 pages seems like it would be really fun for a, you know, and like keep you very entertained for a significant portion of time. Is that true, or is it frustrating?
It was a lot of fun for me. Yeah.
It's fun when it works, which I think is a pretty solid answer for most things writing. So
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
so we're coming up on time. Any final thoughts from either of you, or if anyone who's watching the stream has any last questions that you want to get in before we wrap up? No, pretty well. Okay, so that will bring us to an end for tonight. Everyone can tune in tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. We have 3 more readers who will be joining us to share their work. And it's going to be a very good mix of things. So I'm very excited for that.
Me too.
And yes. And then also next week on Friday evening, Local Writers Read is partnering with LA Arts for their digital art walk. So you can tune in for a genre spotlight from us. We're looking at dark fantasy this time and sharing a couple pieces from that genre. So thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us and sharing your story. And as always, we want to thank Courtney and Quiet City Books for being just a constant supporter and partner for this series, and to the Lewiston Public Library for co-sponsoring what we do as well. It's so great just to be part of the arts community in Lewiston, Auburn, and in Maine. There's so many talented people, and especially right now, it's fun to be able to come together and share stories and just gather in an environment like this. So thank you all. And everyone enjoy your evening, and we will be back later.